All right. Welcome to, I don't know what I'm doing, cognitive psychology, day one of reasoning. Now, for those of you who weren't in class on Monday, which is today, I ended up getting through all of the lecture for problem solving. So there's only one lecture that you'll have to listen to, which is the current one. Also, for anybody who's done this with me before, I have such sad news, and that is that my kids are in bed. So, I'm not going to yell at them. Okay, so one reason I said that I needed you to listen to this prior to Monday is because I was going to start with a reaction paper. So that is still valid and that is still happening. So what I'm going to do is once I get done recording this, I'm going to go on to Canvas and I'm going to set this up as something that you can turn in, right? So you can submit the file. So what I want you to do is type out the answer to this reaction paper number 10. Do you think that you have strong decision-making skills? Are you a decisive person? Indecisive? What do you need to improve when it comes to decision making and reasoning? So that is your question. It is due no later than class time on Monday. So you don't have to do it immediately, but if you forget, well, what can I do? You can't really see me shrugging, but just imagine that that's what I'm doing. All right, cool, thanks. All right, so we're actually going to talk about reasoning, and this is some of the stuff that I promised you guys would make your brain hurt. And so it's a little bit of a shame that we can't do it in class so I can see all of the ridiculous looks. But basically, when we're talking about reasoning in cognitive psychology, what you're really worrying about is arguments and the logic behind them, and the fact that we often believe arguments, even if they're invalid, and I'll explain what that means in a minute, as long as the conclusion is believable. So basically, if you tell us something that we believe, we tend to negate all the logic. So again, we're kind of faulty in the way that we function. But essentially, with reasoning, we start with information and we come to conclusions that go beyond the original information, right? So we do this all the time. We make assumptions, we make conclusions based on limited information. Now, the problem is that information can be really affected by heuristics, which we just talked about in class today. So heuristics are the idea that we look for shortcuts, right? Something quick and easy, some fast way to solve a problem. And then also by memory construction. So we know that we kind of make things, right? We piece together information. So if we have faulty ways that we're looking at things because we're trying to be really simplistic, and if we don't quite have exact memory for past things, you can see how this might lead to faulty reasoning. All right. So in decision making, we're often making choices between two alternatives. So not really sure what I meant with this picture. Maybe hotel rooms or where to live, right? Pick out a new apartment, right? So this apartment has this much square footage, but this one has something else, and I really like the fireplace or whatever. So you have to go back and forth between these different things. And there isn't necessarily a right or wrong answer. What ice cream am I going to have? Oh, that looks good. Oh, apparently 2 spoons I'm sharing with somebody. Or gambling. So I'm gambling, I'm doing well. Should I walk? Should I continue? I might lose my money if I continue, but I might win really big if I stay. So all of these different aspects that we're looking at. And again, you can't really know what the best decision is unless you can know the future and look back. So what we end up doing is we use 2 different types of reasoning. We have deductive reasoning and we have inductive reasoning. I'm sure you've heard those terms before, but you may not necessarily know what they are. Deduction is a conclusion that logically follows from the premises. Now, I'm emphasizing the words because it's going to get confusing. I'm just going to promise you that. Because logic is not what we tend to think it is. All right, so these arguments that I'm going to present to you, these syllogisms, they have rules. So you remember when we were talking about problem solving, I said that there's operators that stand between you and your goal. Well, the rules that I'm going to tell you about are operators. They are rules for all time when you're talking about syllogisms. So just because something logically seems like it would make sense, if it violates these operators, then it won't. Okay, so that probably means nothing to you yet, but just wait. So deduction, conclusion logically follows from the premises. So the premises give you a initial starting point. So for here, it says, in order to register for classes, you must have an advisor's permission. So it's based on the LU system, right? And the conclusion is the next statement is you register for classes. So in order to register for classes, you must have an advisor's permission. Must have. So that means there is no other possibility, right? You must have your advisor's permission. So since you did register for classes, what can you conclude? Here's where you would answer, but obviously you're not here. So I'm assuming that everybody is saying in a very resoundingly loud voice that you talk to your advisor. Okay, so why is that the case? And that's because of the word must. All right, so you must have an advisor's permission. And since we set that up as a non-refutable premise, that is your deduction. It is a conclusion that follows from the premise. Okay. Now, what about induction? Induction is where you arrive at conclusions that are probably true based on evidence. Doesn't mean that they're absolutely true, but they're probably true. So the example that I give is when my husband plays video games, which he's doing now. Haha, and he just looked at me. When my husband plays video games, I get a lot of work done. Last night I got a lot of work done. Look at her face. Isn't that funny? Haha. So, shush. See, I'll yell at him instead of the kids. That's the comic relief you get. All right, so when my husband plays video games, I get a lot of work done. Last night I got a lot of work done. What can you conclude? Now, there is no qualifier here. There's nothing that says every single time or anything like that. It's just saying that when he plays video games, I get a lot of work done. Now, we cannot conclude that I got a lot, or that he played video games last night and that's why I got a lot of work done. Maybe he was out of town. Maybe he was at a meeting. Maybe he was doing something else, right? So it doesn't necessarily absolutely follow from premises that were provided, but based on evidence, it's probably true that he was playing video games, okay? So that's the difference between deduction and induction. Deduction is logical following. Induction is probably true, maybe not. So oftentimes in psychology, we do inductive reasoning, especially in research. So we're conducting studies and then basing on evidence what we think is probably true about human behavior. All right. Oh, I should have kept clicking apparently. All right, so syllogisms. Now this is where we're getting into this more tricky area. Okay. Syllogisms are basically arguments that are designed a certain way. So they include two statements, which are premises, followed by a conclusion. And then we, as the reasonable individuals, have to determine whether we think a syllogism is valid. Okay, so that's not necessarily the same thing as true, but valid, and then also true. Okay, so we're going to talk about categorical syllogisms first. So these use premises and conclusions to describe relationships between categories. What in the world does that mean? I'll show you in a second. So they're going to have statements like all, some, or none. So these are the qualifiers, kind of like when I had the must talk to an advisor earlier. And they're going to set up certain things. So for example, all A's are B's. All B's are C's. Conclusion, all A's are C's. So the premises are all, in this case, we're given two premises, and then we have our conclusion that we logically follow from that with deductive reasoning. Okay, so remember, this is logically follows from the premises. Okay, so if we have all birds are animals, all A's are B's, right? All parrots are birds, all parrots are animals. Okay, so all birds are animals, yep. All parrots are birds, yep. All parrots are animals, perfect. So logically follows. Well, a lot of people study these and they look at, and I mentioned this before, things like logic and validity. Okay, so validity isn't necessarily the same as truth. You can have a valid argument that doesn't necessarily lead to a true conclusion. All right, I'll say that one more time. You can have a valid argument in the system of a syllogism that doesn't necessarily mean that the conclusion has to be true. Okay, so the normative approach involves that logic and validity, and the descriptive approach involves psychology and how well people actually evaluate validity. So the normative approach is you actually look at the argument and base validity of the argument on the form that the syllogism takes. I'll get into that. But then the descriptive approach is basically kind of something that I mentioned earlier, which is a lot of times we don't necessarily listen to the validity of the argument as long as the conclusion is believable. If I can buy it, then I don't care how you sell it to me. All right, so normative approach. All A's are B's, all B's are C's, all C's are A's. So premise 1, premise 2, and conclusion. So this is a really good way to test how people determine validity. So this right here is a valid syllogism. All A's are B's, all B's are C's, all A's are C. Okay. So in the normative approach, when you are evaluating a syllogism, you only look at the form. And form means premise 1, premise 2, leads to a logical conclusion. Okay. Deductive reasoning. You can deduce the conclusion from your two premises. It does not matter what that says. All right, so the argument can say something that seems ridiculous, but if the form of the argument is correct, it is technically a valid syllogism. So again, valid does not necessarily mean true. Okay, I know, I'm going to say it one more time. Valid does not necessarily mean true. Okay, so truth is what is the case. Validity is the conclusions and the premises. Okay. So, various principles for deductive reasoning. Principle 1, if the premises are true, the conclusion of a valid syllogism must be true. Okay, so if the premises are true, the conclusion of a valid syllogism must be true. So, if all A's are B's, and that's true, and all B's are C's, and that's true, therefore, all A's and C's are true. Okay. Second principle is validity is determined only by form, not content. Okay, so this follows the form that we've talked about. All A's are B's, all B's are C's, all A's are C's. Okay, perfect. So this should be valid. Now, all birds are ants. That's A's and B's. All ants have 4 legs. So that's B's and C's. So therefore, all birds have 4 legs. All right. Now, according to principle 2, all birds are ants, all ants have 4 legs, and all birds have 4 legs is a valid syllogism. Because again, validity does not mean truth. So it is a valid syllogism in that it follows the appropriate form, but it is not truthful. So it would actually violate principle number 1, right? Because all birds are not ants. We can just go ahead and throw that out right now. Okay. So all birds are ants, all ants have 4 legs, all birds have 4 legs. Now this one, all birds are ants, so A and B. All ants eat food. Okay, so B is C, and all birds eat food. Yeah, perfect. Okay, now this one, also valid. All right, now it is not a true syllogism because of the first statement, all birds are ants. Now, the second premise and the conclusion are true. But the truth of this will be violated by premise 1, but the validity is intact. It is valid, but not true. Okay? Again, I wish I could see your faces. All right. So that's the normative approach. Remember, the normative approach is really just worried about validity and form and things like that. All right. The descriptive approach, however, is how well people actually function with these syllogisms. So when I'm given a syllogism, how do I judge its validity? Okay. So 2 approaches to how people reason. The first is evaluation. So we present them with 2 premises and a conclusion, and then ask if the conclusion logically follows. Or we present them with 2 premises and ask them to indicate which conclusion from a set follows. Okay, so basically you have, here's your conclusion, is it logical? Or choose among these various options as to which one would make more sense. Okay. And the thing is we just don't understand how syllogisms work. We don't understand that the form is what's important. We don't understand that the logic is what is important. Again, we tend to make certain errors. Okay, so some sources of syllogistic error, syllogistic is just a fun word, the atmosphere effect. So those qualifiers, all, some, none, those things can trip us up. right? So it causes an overall mood that influences our evaluation. We also have belief bias. So again, if the conclusion is true or believes or agrees with my beliefs, then I will judge it as valid. So, well, of course, that's a valid argument. It agrees with me. Okay. And I'm going to negate the form. I'm not going to look at this and truly evaluate the validity of the syllogism. Okay. So all of the students are tired. Some tired people are irritable. Some of the students are irritable. Okay. Now, the question is this a valid syllogism? Now, we read this and we say, oh my gosh, all the students are tired. Yeah, sure. Some tired people are irritable. I know I'm irritable. And some of the students are, I don't doubt that that's true. Okay, looks valid to me. But here's what we've got going on. We have all A are B, all C are D, so some A or D. The logic is not here. We do not have the appropriate premises. We do not have the appropriate conclusion. We have set up nothing that equates A to D. But to us, we look at this and we say, yep, that it looks valid because I believe that conclusion. And I can understand that. I can understand the irritability and the tiredness. Okay, but let's change it. All of the men are tired. Some tired people are women. Some of the men are women. Now, this might be true, but again, it's setting up the same sort of syllogistic reasoning that we had in the last one where we agreed with the premise and we agreed with the conclusion. But here, we're going to realize that this argument is silly and really doesn't make any sense. But when we believe the conclusion, we believe the syllogism is valid. We're not paying attention to the argument. Now, the thing is people use this on you all the time, right? So they will change directions in their argument. They'll throw in irrelevant facts. They'll equate things that really shouldn't be equated, kind of like some tired people are women. Okay, that's nice. But we don't realize that happens. And then all of a sudden you're in this argument that you're not really sure how you're losing all of a sudden because you're not really paying attention to the validity of the argument. Okay. Now again, belief bias, right? So if I believe the conclusion, I am more likely to go along and say that it's a valid syllogism. So here what we have is, this side we have valid syllogisms with a believable conclusion versus a not believable conclusion. And people were judging these as valid. So a believable conclusion is judged more valid than one that is not believable, even though it's a valid syllogism. Now, if you take one that's invalid and it sets up weird premises and whatever else, as long as it's believable, people are more likely to indicate that they believe it's a valid syllogism. Okay, so the believability of the conclusion is what gets us. All right. So again, normative approach only cares about the form. Validity is about form. It's not about truth. Truth is something else. All right, so other things that we can look at with deductive reasoning is the use of mental models. So the idea is we can use deduction to solve certain problems basically in our imagination. So in this question, what we're doing is on a pool table is a black ball directly above the cue ball. So I'm imagining you're now imagining this, right? So I'm imagining you're imagining Koslin and Pylishin would have a fit. The green ball is on the right side of the cue ball, and there's a red ball between them. All right. If I move, so the red ball is between me and the black ball, the cue ball is to the blank of my line of sight. So here you are sort of imagining these things. I'll give you a second to read that through again and see where you think that ball is. All right, so you're working it through. How many of you are writing something down? Some of you might be. All right, so cue ball should be to the left, I'm pretty sure. No, I'm kind of tired. I could be wrong, but thinking it's on the left. All right, so but the idea is that you're using these mental models, right? And you are coming up with a conclusion that logically follows from the premises, such as where those cue ball, where the balls and other things were. So we're again solving these by logical rules. and you have to solve it via imagination. And so here you have this mental model that now we can use this to figure out if our syllogisms, oh, we're going to bring that back. Syllogisms actually follow the valid assumptions that we make. Okay, so here we have the ABC Society. None of the artists are beekeepers. Oh, this is like a Venn diagram thing. So none of the artists are beekeepers. All of the beekeepers are chemists. Therefore, some of the chemists are not artists. Is it a valid syllogism? Okay, so you have to remember the rules. Premises are true. So none of the artists are beekeepers. Yeah, sure. All right. You're telling me about these people. All of the beekeepers are chemists. All right. Therefore, some of the chemists are not artists. And we do have A, B, B, C, C, A. All right. So what do we think? Is it valid? Is it not valid? Well, you can use a mental model to think about this, right? So you can make up individuals and say, well, Jim is an artist, but he's not a beekeeper. And let's see if we can figure out a way to make this work. Okay, so a conclusion is valid only if it cannot be refuted by any model of the premises. So if you lay all of these things out, you come up with something that pretty much matches. And so the annual ABC Kegger is a valid syllogism. But the problem is we're so used to all A's or B's, all B's or C's, all A's or C's, that when we look at this one, none of the artists, oh, remember when I was saying about the atmosphere effect? It makes us unsure because it builds in that extra level of, I don't know, self-doubt perhaps, like, oh gosh, maybe I'm not thinking about this correctly. All right, thinking that's about where I'm gonna go. Yep, that is about where I would want to stop. So syllogisms, it's gonna get interesting. Yeah, so mull that over. We're going to do a lot more heuristic stuff, see what else is going on, and I will see you guys on Monday. Reaction paper. Don't forget, you've got it. You could do it. Thanks. Bye.